Questions and doubts are a common and necessary part of every journey. They help find the best answers to life's hard questions and to challenge long-held beliefs that might not actually be true or proven or healthy. They can keep us from harm or help us to escape bad situations. Sometimes our questions and doubts can set us free, but they aren't easy, and these trying times can make us feel even more disconnected, desperate, and alone. But you are not alone. Recovering from Religion is an organization comprised of people just like you, people who have asked questions, who understand doubt, who can help you navigate through the confusion, and who are genuinely there to help. 24 hours a day, any day, you can reach out for encouragement and support on the telephone or via online chat. And RfR even provides online communities to connect with others just like you, even if you choose to do so anonymously. Recovering from Religion is a safe place where you can reach out, explore your questions, converse with a friend, and be completely yourself without fear. No judgment, no rejection, just an opportunity to connect with someone who understands. There's no reason to go it alone. Recovering from Religion is ready whenever you are. Reach out today at recoveringfromreligion.org.
So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. I am Amaya Perez. I am the online programming director for Recovering from Religion, and I'm also your co-host. And I'm here today with obviously Eric Wells, who is our amazing support group director, and he's also our co-host today. So welcome, Eric, and thank you so much for being here as every week. I appreciate so much that you're here every week, and I can count that you will make me look a bit less bad than I could if I was on my own. So thank you.
I feel the same way. It's a pleasure to be here. I really enjoy doing this. It's kind of like one of the highlights of the week. Folks, like every week, we're going to have a poll. We have a poll that kind of has questions. It doesn't kind of have questions. It actually has questions that will get you in the mindset of what our conversation is going to be about. It's totally anonymous, so we can't see how you answer, but I'm going to go ahead and launch it and answer it as you see fit. In addition to that, I wanted to give another shout out to the atheist community of Austin. They're streaming this to their Discord channel, and we're going to go ahead and put a link to that because it is a fantastic community of folks that you can join and hang out with and have discussions with. We here at RfR really are impressed with everything the ACA has done, and they're just great partners with us. In fact, come to think of it, if you have a secular group or a group out there that's looking to possibly have a Monday night program and want to stream it to their and stream this to their your Discord channel, then feel free to hit us up and we can open up that conversation. Maya, we're here at RfRx, but what exactly is RfRx?
Yes, so RfRx is a series of online weekly sessions in which we bring in guests to discuss different topics that may be relevant to anyone who is interested in recovering from religion or in religion overall. So today, for example, we're going to speak about Islam. So if this is something that interests you, this is the place for you. However, this is not a replacement for the helpline community of recovering from religion. And it's not a replacement for the support groups either. It's more of a complement to these services and a way of giving good advice and coping skills to anyone who needs them right now. If you want to send us any questions, any topic ideas, any feedback, just anything at all, you can do so to our email address, which I'm going to put in the chat. And that is rfrx@recoveringfromreligion.org. And if you're watching this on YouTube, all the links will be in the description down below, so don't worry about that. And if you want to see any of our previous RfRx sessions, all you have to do is go to our YouTube channel. That is youtube.com/recoveringfromreligion. So obviously this one will also be recorded and uploaded to YouTube, I believe, sometime this weekend. But yeah, we post everything there, so make sure you check it out. And now in a more overall kind of topic, what do we do in RfR? So the best way to describe it is by explaining our mission statement. and that is that we offer hope, healing, and support to those who are struggling with issues of religion and non-belief. So Eric, go ahead and explain hope, please.
Absolutely. So like Maya said, we have 3 different areas that RFR works to, strives to help people with. And the one is support, or not, yeah, one is support, of course, but what I'm going to talk about right now is hope. The hope part that we provide is through the sharing and telling and listening and relating to other people's stories, personal stories of how they struggled with their doubt, what's trauma and issues that they overcame. And if I can hear and listen to someone's story and relate to it, then there may be a chance that I can see the light at the end of the tunnel, that life won't be as hard, that what I'm going through may not be as difficult. So the hope that we provide is through those stories, and we share those stories on our blogs, our blog, and our podcast. So we've got links to both of those in the chat. And we also provide healing. Amaya, how do we provide healing with RFR?
Sure. So healing we provide via our helpline agents, and this is done either by phone call or by telephone call or online chat. And basically what it is that you either chat in or you call in, and our agents will listen to you with an empathetic ear and no judgment or criticism to any issue that you may have which is related to religion. And this is a completely confidential, 24/7 available and safe resource to use. So I highly recommend you use it if you feel like you could really use someone just listening to your struggles. And apart from this, we also have a very large number of resources which help in the healing process. And all of this you can find in our resource page, which is recoveringfromreligion.org/resources. And here we have everything from articles, books, podcasts, videos, just anything you can imagine, you will find it there. So I highly suggest you guys go check it out if you want to find out more. And now, Eric, since you are obviously the director of the support groups, please do explain support, because that's your thing.
Yeah. Before I do, I wanted to kind of mention about a little bit more about the resources too. The resources actually get funneled way down to even some religion-specific resources. So if you are an ex-Jehovah's Witness, an ex-Mormon, an ex-Muslim, there are very specific resources for you on our resource page as well. So you can drill way down into a specific issue or a specific religion that you're struggling with. Even like the fear of hell, there is a topic and specific resources for those types of things too. All right, so yeah, support. I'm the support group director. I've been a support group leader for 5 years, and I love the support group program. It's something that for me personally has provided a ton of healing, not only just being a leader, but also being a participant. We at the support groups is our face-to-face meetings. Normally they're in person, but right now we are luckily doing them all we're doing it all virtually. So we don't have any in-person meetings going, but we have virtual meetings, which means that many of you who don't have a support group near you can actually hop into a support group and join them virtually. So it's a fantastic opportunity. We have north of 50 groups around the world, and we're kind of gonna close in close to 60 in the next month. It's amazing. It's really amazing how fast this is growing. But you can find a support group near you at the link in the chat. Each one of our support groups has a meetup group tied to it. In addition to that, we also offer support through the Secular Therapy Project. So Maya talked about the helpline, and I talked about the support groups, and those are both peer supports. None of us are really professionally trained or have any degrees in counseling or therapy. And so sometimes there is a need to have more help than what peer support can provide. And we do that through the Secular Therapy Project. We connect the clients who need the professional help with a secular therapist that has been vetted by our board of therapists. They've been vetted to make sure that they have appropriate licensing in their state or country, to make sure that they maintain a secular practice and how that looks is that they won't send you home to go pray on your problem or go read a verse or meditate on a problem. And in addition to that, they must have a practice that uses evidence-based treatments. So you can find more about that at seculartherapy.org. And if you are a secular therapist yourself, please do apply to become a part of the database so clients can reach out to you from there as well. Maya, what else do you want to talk about?
So I just want to briefly mention our private helpline community. And this is basically an online platform in which you can chat and meet with people who share similar backgrounds as you. We have all sorts of different groups. We have military, we have for families, for females only, for Australians, we have all sorts of different groups. And it's a great way of knowing people that may have had similar experiences as you have. So if this is something that appeals to you, all you have to do is speak to one of our agents, again, via our helpline, which is either online call or chat. That made no sense, phone call or online chat. And they will guide you through all the steps that you need to follow in order to get to one of these groups. And now before we move on, I just want to briefly mention volunteering, because volunteering has been such an amazing gift, I know, for myself and for other volunteers. We have a really, really fantastic community amongst our volunteers. And we really do feel like we're just a family and we have fun and we do something good for the world. So if this is something that appeals to you again, all you have to do is go to our volunteering website. It's pretty intuitive and we have a lot of different roles. So I'm sure we will find one for you. So if you have a bit more extra time or you just want to help other people, I highly suggest you volunteer for us. That would be really, really amazing. And Eric, let's jump to the meeting format.
You bet. So the meeting is going to happen just like every other meeting we have. There's going to be a discussion for about an hour. Actually, it's probably going to go longer than that because the topic that we have today is a very dense and heavy topic. And in fact, we're not going to be able to cover everything in here. There's going to be some things that we miss. But you have the opportunity to ask some questions during the discussion. And any questions that you have, we're going to go ahead and ask them during the second part of the discussion, which is the Q&A session. That'll last about 20 or 30 minutes. Then we're going to wrap up with a message from our executive director, Gail Jordan. And then after that, we're actually going to shut the recording off and open up the lines and have you give you some time to just hang out. If you want to stick around for that, we're going to talk to our guests and see if they're going to be able to stick around for a little bit, and we can have some more conversations with her if she's open to it. But this hangout time has just been fantastic. It's been really neat to see how many people stick around afterwards just to have conversations and discuss things and work through things. I've been impressed with how long and how many people take advantage of it. So feel free. All right, Maya, why don't you introduce our fantastic and exciting guest?
Yeah, I mean, I can't believe she said yes to this project that we have, but unbelievably, today we have Yasmine Mohammed there with us, and she is going to speak about Islam. So today is one of her RfRx religion series category RfRx sessions, and she's just going to walk us through her experience with Islam, and she's also going to speak about Islam overall. We're going to have discussions about the hijab, the religion, how it affects mental health of those who are living under countries dominated by Islam, and this is going to be an amazing session, I'm sure. So I'm sure you all know her, but I'm still gonna let you know a bit about her. So she's a Canadian human rights activist, and she advocates for the rights of women living under Islamic majority countries. She is also the founder of Free Hearts, Free Minds, and this is an organization that provides psychological support for free thinkers who are living under Muslim majority countries. She has been doing an amazing work at this, and we are so grateful to have her. So Yasmine, thank you so much for being here, and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, Islam is one of those topics that I feel like we haven't covered at all in RfRx yet. So I'm super excited because I feel like I've read and seen a lot of things about Christianity, but not so much about Islam. So I'm just so ready for you to let us know all of your thoughts and all of your experience, of course. So I guess the first question would be, can you tell us about your coming out story? What is your experience with Islam? How did you come out of it?
Sure, yeah. Well, I'll try my hardest to talk as much as I can about Islam, but like Eric mentioned, there's only so much that we can say within an hour, but I'll try to say as much as I can. But I did want to just express a little bit of, you know, how unfortunate it is that you're right. We don't hear a lot about Islam, even though it's the second largest religion on the planet. So we should, you know, be more aware of this religion and what it teaches. So I'm really grateful that you guys are having this conversation, because I think it's very important that everybody be a bit more familiar with this global religion that, you know, impacts every single corner of this globe. And, you know, just wanted to express my gratitude for you guys for doing this. I think it's really important. And to answer your question, my coming out story, you know, there's a lot of little things that cause me to have doubt. I'm sure this sounds familiar to a lot of your listeners right now. But it really wasn't until I took a history of religions course at university. And so I took that course as an elective. It was going to be about the 3 monotheistic religions. And I was very well versed in Islam because my mother was the head of the Islamic Studies department at the Islamic school. And she's a student at Al-Azhar University, which is the most prestigious Islamic university. And so I thought, well, you know, I'll probably ace about 1/3 of this course, so this will be an easy course to take, not knowing that it was actually going to be, you know, so significant. It was going to change my life entirely. So my professor for that course grew up in Lebanon. He grew up in a Christian family in Lebanon. And so we had sort of that connection with us both coming from an Arab background. And here I am sitting in his class with hijab on. And he gave me the opportunity for the very first time in my life to look at my religion with a critical eye. I was never allowed to question anything about the religion before. And so to just have that opportunity to look at it, to question it, to compare it to the other monotheistic religions, it did not take long before the house of cards came falling down. So that was really the moment for me. That was my coming out story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that does resonate, I think, with a lot of people in the audience, because I mean, I've never been religious, I've always been an atheist, but when people have talked to me about their coming out of Christianity, it has been a very similar experience, is that once they have access to education, they just stop believing because they realize that it's not true, I guess. So we don't commonly think of Islam being like big in Canada. So how did you got into Islam? Because I feel like we associate it to other countries, but maybe not so much to Canada.
Well, my father is from Palestine and my mother is from Egypt, and they met in university in Egypt. And because at the time, Egypt was allowing Palestinian people to get their university education for free, just like any other Egyptian citizen. And they went to university together and they met and decided to get married and then moved to San Francisco together. Mm-hmm. And neither of them grew up in a particularly Islamic household, even though they were both born and raised Muslims. Mm-hmm. So my mom, actually, she went to Catholic schools because her parents wanted her to learn French. You know, my dad was super agnostic, secular, you know, just Muslim, I guess, culturally. But once their marriage fell apart, so they moved from San Francisco to Vancouver, Canada. They had me, and soon after, their marriage fell apart, and my mom was left with 3 kids. So she'd had my sister in San Francisco, and then my brother in Vancouver, and then me in Vancouver. And so she was left in a country with no support system. She was all alone, and she has 3 kids. And so she went looking for support and community, and she ended up going to the local mosque. And that's when her zealotry began. She became what I call a born again Muslim. So it's just exactly that. When you think of a born again Christian and how they're very, they're usually a lot more zealous than people who are, Christians their whole lives. So she was a Muslim her whole life, but she never really took the religion. She never really took it seriously. And so now she became the second wife. So the second concurrent wife in Islam, you can marry, a man can marry up to 4 women. He can have up to 4 wives. And so this man that she met was already married, and he already had 3 kids, but he took my mom on as his second wife, and took her 3 kids on to support as well. Even though we're living in Canada, which polygamy is supposed to be against the law, our government turns a blind eye to that, not just here in Canada, in the UK and other countries as well. And so then she, that's when everything started. So I was about 5 or 6 years old at the time. She started wearing hijab. Music was haram, which means forbidden. So he'd break all of her records. Yeah, actually, he sat us down in the living room, picked up her records. It was like Dolly Parton, Hank Williams, Kenny Rogers. We had so many records. And he not only broke them all, but he passed them to me and my brother and my sister and said, "You break them as well." And I remember sitting there at 5 or 6 years old, looking up at my mom thinking, why are you letting this guy break your stuff? Why aren't you saying anything? Why aren't you doing anything? And when he handed the record to me to break it, I refused. And I'm like, I'm not going to break my mom's stuff. And that's kind of, that's just one small example of what it was like. Like that, when Islam entered my life, it was with a bang. And it was all of a sudden, you're not allowed to have non-Muslim friends anymore. We lived in an apartment building where my best friends, Chelsea and Lindsay, were down the hall, and we'd always play Barbies together. Suddenly, they weren't allowed in the house anymore. I wasn't allowed to their house anymore because they're non-Muslims. Wasn't allowed to ride a bike anymore, wasn't allowed to go swimming. Everything changed. And so it was like a dark cloud entering my life. Everything just became negative. And so I fought against it for a very long time, but I'm a kid. So how much can a kid fight before they submit and succumb to what the adults are insisting? And of course there is, physical abuse involved. And so that also keeps a kid in line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I'm so sorry that you had to deal with that. I can't imagine how difficult that must have been, especially happening so early and with such close families. So I'm so sorry. And I think you're amazing for having overcome that because right now you are an activist. So do you want to tell us a bit about your activism, what it is that you do? Just let us know what positive came out of that bad experience, I guess.
Well, I think the main thing was when I was leaving Islam, when I was going through all of that, I had to be very, very quiet because the punishment for leaving Islam is execution. So you would not only be, like in 15 Muslim majority countries, you would be legally executed by the state, but in other countries and communities, you are you're in danger because of honor killings, honor violence, or even just random other Muslims that feel that you need to be killed because you've left the religion, you've betrayed Islam. So I stayed quiet for many years, and they were very, very lonely, dark, scary years.
Yeah.
And so I decided that I wanted to write a book. So I wrote my book, Unveiled. Essentially was to reach out to other people who were feeling just as lonely as I was, because I didn't want anyone to ever feel that alone. I wanted them to know there's somebody else out here that is thinking and feeling the same things. You're not crazy. It's not the devil whispering in your ear. Those thoughts that you're having are perfectly valid and perfectly normal. And so I wrote my book, and I've been just inundated, so grateful of so many people reaching me from all over the world, telling me how much they relate to my book. And so many people have told me reading your story felt like reading my story. And I think that that's really been the most rewarding thing. And from writing this book grew my organization, Free Hearts, Free Minds, which offers psychological support. Like you mentioned, we have a psychotherapist who will offer support to ex-Muslims living in Muslim majority countries where there is absolutely no other avenue for them to get support. So there's something called pastoral counseling sometimes in Christian, in the Christian communities, but no such thing in Muslim communities. If you have any kind of trauma or anxiety or depression or even, mental health illnesses, the only answer is to pray harder and to have a stronger faith, because if you are suffering in any way psychologically, it's because you are too far from Allah. You have to pray harder. So when I was leaving Islam, I felt that the most difficult thing for me, or I guess the most helpful thing for me, the most supportive thing for me, is exactly what you guys do here at the Recovering from Religion Foundation, was to have support. And so that's what I tried to do with my book, and that's what I try to do with my organization.
And you're definitely doing an amazing job at that, obviously. And what you were saying about when you think that maybe Islam is not the way, that people from the religion tell you that you're away from God and that, it's the devil whispering to you, that sounds very suspiciously familiar to what Christian fundamentalist religions do, which is that if you're starting to believe that maybe God is not there, or he's not as great as they made you believe it is, then you're just not praying enough, you're not close enough to him. Always him, of course, never her. So it's pretty interesting how they overlap, how different religions that are supposed to have such different beliefs overlap with each other. So I guess the next question again would be, what beliefs sets this religion apart from others? Not only just Christianity, but obviously any other religion in the planet, which thousands of them. So
yeah. I think there are a few things that make Islam distinct, especially today. One of them being in the 50 or so Muslim majority countries that we have on the planet, they follow Sharia law, so they follow Islamic law.
Yeah.
So that prevents a Muslim person from questioning, like you were just talking, like even if you have people around you telling you, that's just the devil and trying to pull you out of it. If you're living in a secular country, you still have the option of leaving the religion and continuing your life and living it the way you want to live it. But when you're living in one of those many Muslim majority countries that follow Sharia, you don't have that option.
Yeah.
So this can range anywhere from, like I mentioned, in 15 of those countries, you can be executed, or in more progressive countries like in Egypt, you won't be executed, you'll be put in an insane asylum instead. Or in countries like in Jordan, you will lose all of your civil liberties. So you'll no longer, your children will no longer legally be yours. You no longer be legally married. There's certain countries that say you can't even be a citizen of the country, like the Maldives, if you are not a Muslim. So the coercion happens in much more than just at the familial or community level. It's at a law enforcement level, where it forces people to pretend, at least, that they're still a part of this religion, which is something that's very common with people that are especially part of the LGBT community, because you could be doubly executed, once for being gay and once for leaving the religion. So people have to live a very hidden double lives where they hide who they are and what they believe, because the society around them will not only will the people in the society around them demonize them for it, but the societal structures in place will actually, could possibly imprison or even execute them. So what makes it uniquely dangerous right now is that it is difficult for Muslims to progress their religion, because all these systems are in place forcing them to conform, and only, they have to be fundamentalist Muslims, or at least act that way and pretend to be that way, or there will be some difficult consequences that they're going to have to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just remember that for my third job, my boss was part of the LGBT community, and he was offered a job in a country that was dominated by Islam. And he decided not to go for, amongst other reasons, and it was this like amazing job opportunity, and he missed on that, like partially because of that. And I just can't imagine how it must be like to be born in that country and not being able to escape, and having to live that like environment and those circumstances. So yeah, all my love and support if you are in that situation. I cannot imagine the pain you're going through at all. So there's been a couple of messages on the chat asking you to clarify the difference between Muslim and Islam. If you can do that.
Oh, sorry. Yes. So Islam is the religion itself. So Islam is like saying Christianity, and Muslim is the individual. So that's like saying Christian. Yeah. So so one is the ideology and one is the human being. Islam is the ideology, Muslim is a person.
Okay, yeah, sounds good.
Perfect. From what I understand, Judaism was maybe like the seed religion, and then Christianity sort of split off from that, taking a certain Abrahamic, one of his descendants, and then Islam, maybe 800 years later, started up and kind of went from a different Abrahamic descendant. Is that kind of accurate, how it sort of formed or became something?
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's exactly it. So Judaism first, and then Christianity, and then Islam. And Islam added its own unique twists that were not in the religion before, and it added some sort of fail-safe things that I think that they recognize, or that Muhammad would have recognized, like, how can I make this even more ironclad to make sure that people don't go from becoming Jews to becoming Christians, and now how am I going to stop them from leaving Islam and becoming something else, for example. He didn't want that to happen. And so hence the punishment for apostasy being execution.
That's pretty, that would keep me at least pretending to be a believer if my life was on the line.
Mm-hmm.
Now, does Islam have a specific holy book? I know that Christianity has got the Bible, and there's several different flavors of the Holy Bible. What about Islam?
So Islam has the Quran, which differs from the Bible in that it is not parables and metaphors. It is the literal word of Allah. So it's supposed to be, this is how it happened. It's like an ancient game of telephone. Allah spoke to Gabriel, and then Gabriel spoke to Muhammad. So Muhammad was in a cave all alone, fasting, and he heard a voice. And it turned out that that voice was the voice of Gabriel, and Gabriel was relaying to him what Allah was saying. And Muhammad himself was illiterate, so he would take what he heard from Gabriel, and then he would go and he would tell people who knew how to write, and he would get them to write it down. And that's how the Quran was made. So when you read the Quran, it is not chronological. It doesn't, it's just, it's a mishmash of different things that are quite often in contradiction with each other. So that's the Quran. That's the holy book that is the literal word of Allah. And then, so along with that, almost, it's not of equal value because it's not the literal word of Allah, but it is seen as just as important, and that is the hadith. So that's the sunnah, that's the way Muhammad lived his life. So for example, the Quran will just say you need to pray, but then the hadith will explain how exactly to pray and how many prayers are there in a day and when they happen, et cetera, et cetera. So they are like, they supplement, the hadith supplement the Quran. And so, you know, for example, the Quran will say gay people need to be killed, and then the hadith will explain that they get thrown off the highest building, like that.
Where does that come from? Is that a separate book, or is it sort of missives that have been passed down from the what are they called? Imams?
Well, yeah, so it is word of mouth from just people who are trusted. And some of these things that are written down were written down like 200 years after Muhammad's death. Okay. And so it is very, very difficult to ascertain whether, you know, the validity of these hadith, but they are taken, you know, it is what is used for the laws in many countries around the world today. So for you or I, we would look at that and we'd say, well, you know, you just have this passed down from like 50 different people. You said this guy said to this guy, who said to this guy, who said to this guy, who said to this guy. Literally, it's all like, they follow the trail of who said what. But, you know, it's really,
it sounds like a game of telephone.
It's really unbelievable. Sorry?
It sounds like a game of telephone if it's all.
Absolutely. Absolutely a game of telephone. And there's certain people that are more trusted than others, because others who told hadith, they realized, oh no, they're lying, or that can't possibly be true. So they're not quite as trusted as other people. And if they are trusted, they're called sahih hadith. So Sahih al-Bukhari is what's considered the most trusted source of hadith. So even the most trusted source of hadith is still, you know, not anything that would ever be, you know, it wouldn't pass any sort of academic rigor. You wouldn't accept it as any kind of resource in an academic paper.
Got it. And then they worship, Muslims worship Allah, and that's what Christians would call God, or and then for Christians, Jesus was for Judaism, Jesus was a prophet. For Christians, Jesus was also a God. So it sounds like Allah is the God, and he's got a whole bunch of angels, or whatever gender Allah is, and then Muhammad was a prophet of God. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So the way Muslims explain it is that all of the prophets were Muslim. Even Adam and Eve were Muslim. I know that doesn't, timelines, it doesn't work, but that's the way it is. So all of the prophets were Muslim, and Muhammad is the last prophet, even Jesus. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And in terms of how they communicate with Allah, do they do it by prayer, by chants? Is there like any specific rituals that Muslims follow?
Yeah. Yeah. So 5 times a day. So once before the sun rises, and then once after the sun has risen, and then once as the sun is setting, and then once, you know, after the sun has set. 5 times a day, you are praying to Allah. The prayers are very, very specific. So there's not really any room for you to be, you know, asking for things or talking to Allah, but you're just you're worshiping him. So the Islam teaches that humans were created to worship Allah. That's our purpose.
Mhm.
And so that 5 times a day, you're just worshiping. You're just saying, you know, you're so wonderful. Thank you so much. You're so gracious. You know, you're almighty, blah, blah, blah. And you do that 5 times a day. And then after the prayers are over, you can say a dua, which means like you can ask Allah for something. And those du'as are usually, you know, asking for Israel to be annihilated, asking to spread Islam across the globe. Like if you go to a mosque on a Friday and they have the khutbah, which is like the sermon, and when everybody kind of says the du'a together, that's generally what it is. And then everybody just at the end of it says amen, ameen. And yeah, that's how you worship.
Mm-hmm. So you just said that on Friday they do these sort of things. I'm not going to even try to describe it because English is not my first language, and you said a word that I can't remember. But is there any specific holidays of the week and any specific places of worship that Muslims go to?
Yeah. So Friday is the holy day of the week that men should go to the mosque to pray. Women shouldn't leave their homes for any reason other than an emergency, but men should go to the mosque to pray on Fridays. Another thing I forgot to mention was that everybody has to face the direction of the Kaaba in Saudi Arabia. So that's that black box that your listeners might be familiar with. Only Muslims are allowed there. Non-Muslims are not allowed in that area at all. And that's where Hajj takes place as well. Once a year, there's a pilgrimage to Mecca. And that didn't happen this year because of coronavirus, but it usually happens every year. And it makes millions and millions of dollars for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Mm-hmm. So everybody has to point in the direction of that big black cube, pray 5 times a day, men in the front and women behind. Mm-hmm. Women need to be covered everything except for their face and hands when they're praying. Men can wear whatever they want. In mosques, they usually have they always have a separate entrance for women and men. So usually the men are going in from the front doors, and there's a back door or a side door for women who are in a completely separate area, neither seen nor heard. So the gender segregation in a mosque is very, very clear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Sorry, Eric, I think you were going to say something.
Yeah, I've been corrected in the chat, and for Jews, for Judaism, Jesus was not seen as a prophet. He was seen as a heretic and possibly even a false prophet. So just correct that for the record. So Mecca is similar to Jerusalem for Christians. So Mecca for Muslims and Jerusalem for Christians and such. Is that pretty, like, it's the holiest of holy sites?
It is the holiest of holy sites for Muslims, yes.
And was there something specific that happened at that site, or is it traditionally they think that happened at the site?
Well, I think at this point I'm going to suggest that your listeners look up a documentary by Tom Holland. And oh gosh, I can't remember the exact name of the documentary, but basically it is, so Islamically we get taught one thing about, why that became the holy site. But then when you look at historically, it turns out that the stories that we were told were most definitely not true, because the historical evidence that we have shows it to be not true. But basically, it was supposed to be this, it's the house of Allah. Initially, the Kaaba, it used to have all sorts of pagans. These are the stories. It had all sorts of pagans from the Arab world, all used to go there and worship together. So it was like as they were traveling through the desert, they'd stop by there and they'd do their prayers. And it was kind of like an interfaith, open, anybody can go here and pray regardless of what God you were praying to. But then when Muhammad came along, and once he started to have power, he went and he broke all of the other idols that were in Mecca. And he said, from now on, the only God that's going to be worshipped here is Allah. So that he sort of like, that's where he put his stamp on, not his stamp, but he sort of put his foot down and said, okay, from now on, this is going to be the Islamic holy site. We're getting rid of all the other religious artifacts. And that sort of tradition of breaking the religious artifacts of other people, of other religious people, is something that is continued today. As recently we saw in Palmyra, in Syria, ISIS were demolishing a lot of ancient artifacts there, in Palmyra, and in Afghanistan, they demolished huge Buddhist statues. I could go on and on. So this is that tradition has continued on, that when Islam takes over a country, it demolishes the culture or the religion that was there before it. My family is from Egypt, where, Islam entered there hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So the idea of the pyramids and ancient Egyptians and all of that stuff has lost its value to Egyptian people a long, 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 long time ago. It really was only valuable to the British people that came in and started to unearth all of these treasures. And that's how it became world famous. But Muslims themselves in Egypt didn't care about that history at all. But now there is sort of a resurgence of people trying to reclaim their pre-Islamic cultures, and that's nice to see.
I suspect you're being sarcastic.
No, I mean it. I mean, like in Egypt, for example, we're in North Africa. We have nothing to do with Arabs, but we speak Arabic. We consider ourselves Arabs. And now, the country is called the Arab Republic of Egypt. And yeah, completely colonized to the point that we forgot who we even were. And so now there's this resurgence of people saying, actually, we're not Arab. And so they're reclaiming who they were before they were colonized. And the same is happening in Morocco, same is happening in Iraq, same is happening in lots of what we would consider Arab countries all around the world. And while that's happening, almost simultaneously, you can see countries like Malaysia and Indonesia losing their cultures day by day, where the people there are fighting against it and saying, why are we dressing like Arabs? This is not our culture. This is not who we are. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But because there's such a intertwining of the religion and the culture that sometimes it's hard to separate the two. But if it's happening in a country that already had an established culture, and you can see it happening today, currently, where like in Somalia, for example, if you look at traditional Somali dress, it's absolutely beautiful, and it's colorful and it's gorgeous, and they got the beaded necklaces. And if you look at Somali women today, they're covered head to toe in black. And the ones who dress like the Somalis before Islam are almost demonized for being, heretics and infidels, because they're dressing in their own cultural clothing. So there is a push from people, not just ex-Muslim people, but from Muslim people as well, who are saying, just because I want to follow this religion, why does that mean I have to entirely erase my culture and who I am, and start speaking Arabic and start dressing like an Arab and you see that with, I don't know if you're familiar with any American converts to Islam. One of the first things they do is change their name to a Muslim name. All of a sudden they go from being Bob to being Muhammad, or from being, Donna to being Aisha. And there's that real sense of you have to forget who you were, and you are now completely reinventing yourself as a new person. and ignoring all of your culture that you were a part of beforehand.
Mm-hmm. So your identity basically just goes away and is stolen, let's say, by Islam.
Yes.
That
yes. And that is exactly why it is so difficult for, that's why Muslims take it so personally when you talk about the religion, when you criticize the religion, because they have been taught to think of their religion as a part of who they are. It's their identity. Like, I didn't even know, honest to God, I didn't even know I could leave Islam. I didn't know it was, I had never met another ex-Muslim. I'd never heard the term ex-Muslim until 2014. You just think that it's who you are. You can say, I'm not practicing anymore, but you always think that that's in your DNA. And, you know, it's really nice now to see that there are a lot of Arabs who are speaking up, who are from, you know, that are Christian or Jewish or atheists, that are saying, I'm Arab, this is my culture, but I have nothing to do with that religion. And so that's really nice for me, especially because it gives me a community that I can relate to, that isn't, you know, littered with all of that Islamic stuff that's just going to give me PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Christianity has got so many different flavors, Southern Baptist, Anabaptist, there's a ton of different ones. Does Islam have a similar split and schisms in it? Are there different sects of Islam?
There are, but it's important to remember that 90% of Muslims are Sunni Muslims. So that's the kind of Islam that I grew up in. Okay. 90%. And then the other 10% are a mix of, you know, mostly Shia, they come second in line. And then the last, like, you know, 2% has like a bunch of different little sects in there. And so when I speak about Islam, I'm generally talking about Sunni Islam, and to a certain extent Shia Islam, because it follows, it's very similar in a lot of ways. So for example, to clarify it for you, Saudi Arabia follows Sunni Sharia. So Saudi Arabia is a Sunni Islamic country, whereas Iran is a Shia Islamic country. And if you look at the two countries and if you look at their two laws, you'll see that they're incredibly similar. Both of them are, you know, remarkably degrading to women. They both force women to dress in certain ways. They both, you know, they are both okay with child marriages. They're both okay with just women being demeaned in 100 different ways. They both will execute people who leave Islam. They both will execute anybody who's part of the LGBT community. And they both will punish in different ways, whether it's lashings or whatever. Drinking alcohol is forbidden. So you know what I mean? If you look at the laws of the two countries, you'll find that they're incredibly similar, but they both really, really hate each other, which is good for us. I'm glad that they hate each other, because the last thing in the world we want is those two countries joining hands.
What are the differences between? What are the differences?
Not really. It's actually quite silly. Their differences are really, really silly. Like, they pray slightly differently. You know, they have some small differences, like Muslims really revere Aisha. So she's the 6-year-old that Muhammad married when he was 53. Whereas
he married a 6-year-old?
Yes. Yeah. I'm just going to gloss past that.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. So she was 6 years old when he married her. Yeah. And so Sunni Muslims revere her. They think of her as, like, you know, the queen of the Muslim women, whereas Shia Muslims don't like her. So really the schism happened after Muhammad died. He didn't say who his successor was going to be. So Abu Bakr, who was his best friend at the time, wanted to be his successor, and also Ali, who was his cousin, wanted to be his successor. So those two men
Oh, wow.
wanted to be the next in line. And the ones who followed Abu Bakr became Sunni Muslims. So that's 90% of Muslims.
And that's the brother, right?
That's the friend.
Oh,
That was
I'm
his
sorry, the
best friend.
The one who
Yeah,
followed Muhammad's friend became 90%
correct.
of the Muslims. Okay.
Yeah. And then the ones that followed his cousin became Shia Muslims. I should also say that Abu Bakr was very ruthless. When you read about, how Muslims invaded countries and killed people and all that stuff, like it was usually Abu Bakr that was leading those kinds of, all of those battles. So he was, so that's kind of why most people followed him, because it's that convert or die attitude that he had, which encouraged a lot of people to convert.
Oh, I see. Okay. So it was might instead of right type of thing. Like if you were violent, if you don't convert to our religion, then we will kill you type of thing.
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah. By the sword. Yeah. That's how Islam spread. I mean, it's quite remarkable how quickly it spread because of fear, really.
I mean, it's quite convincing. If someone told me that, you need to either die or pretend to believe whatever, I know what my option will be. So
yeah,
that makes perfect sense.
Of course, you want to protect yourself and your family.
Yeah, definitely. What are some practices that Muslim people do in terms of, for example, some versions of Christianity, they go door to door to proselytize. I know some Muslims endorse hijab. So I know it's a very broad question, but can you talk us a bit? Yeah.
So Islam has da'wah, which is also proselytizing. The aim of Islam is to spread the whole globe. So you want all human beings on the planet to be praying to Allah. That's the end goal. And so in order to reach that goal, different Muslims will do different things and they will use different methods. But that's really what the religion is encouraging you to do. They don't usually go door to door, but, in Muslim majority countries, what happens is you'll notice, I call them Muslim majority countries now, but those countries used to have a lot of Jewish people in them, used to have a lot of Christian people in them, used to have a lot of pagans, used to have a lot of Zoroastrians, whatever. And slowly, those people are killed or pushed out in different ways. So one example, again, I'll bring up Egypt, which is the country that my mother is from. What they did is once Israel became a state, they told every Jewish man, they said every Jewish man between the ages of 16 and 60 needs to either leave the country or go to prison indefinitely. Wow. So like I said, that's a progressive country. So not, so that was the ultimatum that they were given. So what it did essentially was it forced all of the men, and of course taking their families with them, to leave. And it left a handful of women were left in Egypt. A few years ago, there was like 5 or 6 women left in Egypt. And they were the ones that were still caring for the synagogues that were left there. And of course, those women were past childbearing age. And so before long, there won't be any Jewish people left at all in this country, where there used to be, hundreds of thousands before. And you can go to cemeteries where Jewish people are buried, and it looks no different than a landfill, because people will actively vandalize and throw garbage and attack basically dead Jewish people. Like they're dead, but it's still not good enough. We still have to go spit on their graves. So there's a very, it's incredibly anti-Semitic, of course, but it's also anti any other religion other than Islam. So there are about 10% of Egyptians are Christian, and they will also be finding that they're being killed as they pray in their churches. I mean, a few years ago, 300 Christians were slaughtered in a church as they were praying. I think it was Easter. And there's so many discriminations, of course, that happen. It's not just straight up murder. So it's very, very difficult for you to live in any of those countries if you are not Muslim. So it's, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So about horrible costumes and not costumes, traditions. You mentioned before that the Prophet married a 6-year-old. So someone in the comments asked whether Muslims living currently in 2020, do they allow marriage to 9-year-olds or like
Yes.
underage?
So under Sharia, so what happened in Pakistan recently is they released a law that said as long as the girl has had her period, then she is a woman. So even if she's 9 years old, it doesn't matter. She's now ready to be a woman, ready to be a wife, ready to be a mother. And there are horrific cases all over the Muslim majority world of young girls being married off at all sorts of ages. There's one horrific story of an 8-year-old girl in Yemen who was married off to a man who was over 40, and he raped her to death on her first day. So that's one out of countless stories. It's very, very common that young girls are married off because Islam teaches that Muhammad is the best person, the best example of all of humanity for all time, and you should follow his example. Mm-hmm. So marrying a young child is following his example. And that's why it is so difficult to have laws in those countries that prohibit young girls from being married off and being raped. Essentially, it's sanctioning child rape. Mm-hmm. Because even if they do have those laws in place, the people themselves will say the laws of a human is not going to supersede the laws of our religion, and our religion says that young girls can be married. So,
and also raped to death is something that they're happy with, I'm assuming.
So it is a natural. Oh, this is a difficult conversation because it's just so common, not just in Yemen, but in Egypt and all over, especially if it's in a country that I watched a video of a girl in Afghanistan. This is what is so hard to explain is this young girl was being married off to an older member of her family, and her mother was screaming and wailing and holding on to her daughter, and the men were pulling this girl out of her mother's arms. That mother was probably raped herself as a child, and so she knew what she was being pulled into. But the whole system, the whole society, the whole fucking religion, and the example of this man who raped a young girl is just so massive, and so, she was helpless to protect her own daughter knowing that her daughter is going to be pulled into this man's home and who knows what is going to happen to her. So even when people don't want it to happen, the structures in place are so strong that it's almost impossible to fight against. So quite often moms don't react like this mother in Afghanistan reacted. Quite often mothers will lie to their daughters and they'll say, this is the best thing that you can do. Allah will be so proud of you. Your dad and I will be so proud of you. You're such a good girl for doing this. You know, blah, blah, blah. And so they'll make it as if it's a choice, because it just makes it easier for them, because they're in a situation where they literally don't have a choice anyway. So they find the best way to deal with the situation.
My heart is so heavy hearing that.
Yeah, it's very difficult to follow, to say anything after that, because obviously it's so horrific that is just,
sorry,
what can you say on that?
This is, you know, but that's a common way, like as human beings, what do? We fight, flight, or freeze is our three things that we can do when we're being terrorized, right? How are they going to fight? You know, how are they going to fight? You see women in Saudi Arabia that were fighting for the right to drive are in prison right now. Women in Iran that were fighting for the right to not wear a hijab are in prison right now. If somebody tries to fight, they're lucky if they get imprisoned, right? Even here in Canada, girls are murdered for not wearing hijab. In Texas, 2 girls were murdered by their father. I mean, the honor killings and the honor violence, I'm sure you both know and your listeners know, rampant. And if you're not aware, then please watch a documentary called Honor Diaries. So fighting is almost impossible to do. Flight, where are they going to fly to? You live in a country, where are you going to go? The police, the government, like who's going to support you in that kind of a society? There's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to flee. And so freeze is the only option that they're left with. So they accept it. I mean, they don't accept it, but they don't have another option. And then people look at them and they say, oh, Muslim women are fine living in those societies because they're not fighting back. They're okay with wearing hijab. They're okay with child marriages. They're okay with female genital mutilation because they're not seeing them fighting back, screaming in the streets, pushing back against these things. But the truth is, they are frozen. They are frozen in place and they don't see any other way of fighting back. And that's why I think it's really important. That's why the subtitle of my book is How Western Liberals Empower Radical Islam. That's why I feel like it's very important for people like us who are living in free countries. This is why I said at the top of the hour, I'm glad that we're talking about Islam. It's the second largest religion on the planet. We need to be aware of it. We need to be aware of it because we need to know how oppressive it is. And when there are people that are fighting against it, we need to be able to support those people and reach out to them and say, I hear you, I see you. All of the liberal-minded people and the feminists and the humanists and the people that are against homophobia and against anti-Semitism that are living in the Muslim majority world, we should be supporting them. We should be reaching out to them, lifting them up, you know, helping their voices to be heard. But instead, what are we doing? Instead, we're lifting up the voices of Islamists, we're putting a hijab on Barbie, we're putting a Nike swoosh on hijabs, we're putting it on the cover of magazines. We are celebrating, we are fetishizing, we are supporting the aspects of the religion that are the fundamentalists that are oppressing the rest of the society. So we are linking hands with the wrong side here. We're just not, the reason why that's happening is because people are not understanding Islam enough, and they are not understanding the fight that Muslims have right now. You know, I always say that we're here on our 4th wave of feminism in the West. Barely ripples. There's barely ripples of the first wave of feminism in some parts of the Muslim world. And those are the people that we should be supporting. The actual suffragettes, the literal suffragettes in those countries, they're the ones that we should be linking hands with instead of with the people that oppress them.
So I guess that the hijab is the expression of purity culture in Islam, whereas in Christianity or other version of Christianity, they have different systems. Hijab is like the biggest representation of purity culture. Is that correct? Or
yeah, I mean, it's purity culture, but it's so much more than that. It's just the visual representation of the subjugation and of the gender segregation, and of it's the handcuffs. When you see a slave, you won't, what is the visual thing that's going to let you know this person is enslaved? It's the handcuffs. The hijab is the handcuffs. It's just the visual thing for you.
Holy shit.
But these women are enslaved in those countries.
I never considered that.
Yes. Yeah. And it's so much more than the hijab, because the hijab is women should neither be seen nor heard. Even a woman's voice is considered aura, which means nudity. So whether it's her hair or her face or her breasts or her voice, it's all considered nudity. A woman should be completely hidden away, and she's not an independent human being. Just yesterday, I retweeted an article from BBC that was celebrating in Afghanistan now, finally, on a birth certificate, can you include the name of the mother? The name of the mother was never even included on the birth certificate of children, just the name of their father. Not only in Afghanistan, but in Egypt and in countries all over the Muslim majority world, a woman's name is never even uttered. She's so not an individual. She is so not an independent human being that she doesn't even have a name. She's called daughter of her dad, the dad's name, or mother of, and then her son's name. So that's it. She never actually has a name of her own.
Mm-hmm. So one of the questions we usually ask in the religious series is, what are the unique struggles that people in that specific religion suffer? And I guess you just kind of went over it with women having this sort of invisibility in the religion. I'm going to assume that they cannot take part in any leadership positions either. No,
that's something that Muhammad made very clear. He said, no people will succeed if they are led by a woman. He also said that women are less intelligent than men. He also said that hell will be filled with more women than men. The religion also stipulates that in a court of law, of one woman's testimony is only worth half the testimony of a man. So 2 women are equal to 1 man. And that's the same when it comes to laws surrounding inheritance. Boys will inherit a certain amount, 100%, and then women, the girls in the family, will inherit half of whatever the men in the family are getting. And so, yes, there's definitely, when it comes to unique issues, there's definitely unique issues around women, and there's definitely unique issues around the LGBT community as well.
Which, in that note, are they, like, people from the LGBT community, are they kind of condemned to death, or is there any redemption in Islam for them?
So in Islam, if you are gay, then you are not allowed to act upon it. So once you have same sex, then you are to be punished, and that punishment is death, execution.
Okay.
We have been talking about a lot of negative things. One of the questions I can hear someone possibly asking is this just the extreme end of Islam? Is this how most Muslims view the religion, or is this a very common practice? Like these things we're talking about?
The things that I'm talking about are what the religion teaches. So there are 2.6 billion Muslims on the planet. Not all of them are going to follow their religion to a T. They're all going to follow their religion to different degrees. So it's a spectrum. But also, like I said earlier, even if there are Muslims who do not want to follow these edicts, they are living in societies that will not allow them to live the way they want to live. So we really can't get an accurate representation of how many Muslims disagree with execution of LGBT, how many Muslims disagree that women are subordinate to men, you know, how many Muslims disagree with, you know, all of these aspects of Sharia that I'm talking about. They can't speak up against the religion because they will be punished for it, whether by their family, their community, their society, or even by law enforcement in some countries. So yes, there are definitely Muslims who do not want to follow all these aspects of the religion, and that's not hard to guess why. It's a very difficult religion to follow, but they have to be quiet about it, and so they have to pretend that they're still following it. If they're living in the West, so you'll have people like Majid Nawaz in the UK, or people like Asra Nomani in the US, or Imam Tawhidi in Australia. You have a lot of Muslims who believe in reforming the religion. So at least they believe in still being Muslims, but living as humanists, as, you know, feminists, as, you know, liberal people. And that is possible when you're living in the West because you're in a secular country that will allow you to be able to do that. But in a lot of these countries, that's simply not an option. You can have those thoughts, you know, quietly to yourself, anonymously on Twitter, but you cannot actively, you know, sway a rainbow flag, or you will be imprisoned for it, which has happened in Egypt. You can't publicly refuse to wear hijab, or you'll be imprisoned for it. Et cetera, et cetera.
It sounds like there is a cultural Muslim. Like I know that there are many non-practicing Jews who identify as being Jewish, culturally Jewish. Is that something similar that we might experience?
Well, what makes it different from Judaism is that Jewish people are actually a tribe. So they are a people. Okay. They are an ethnic group. So even if they are not practicing Jews, even if they're atheists, they're still Jewish people because it's still their ethnicity. It's not the same for Muslims. There is no ethnicity. It's like Christians. So you're going to have a Christian from the Philippines or from Mexico or from Italy or whatever. They all have completely different cultures, completely different languages, completely different food, completely different music. They share nothing except for the fact that they share this religion. Muslims are like that. So they don't have any other cultural aspects in common except for this religion. So it's really religious, not cultural. So yeah, that's what makes it a little bit different from Jewish people.
Now,
sorry, Eric, go on.
There are people, obviously like yourself, who are who begin to have doubts and want to leave Islam. What are some of the unique challenges that people may like adherents who doubt may face coming out of it? I know we talked about honor killings and we talked about executions and the need to remain anonymous. Is there other things that we might need to be aware of for folks who are trying to leave
Yeah, so first and foremost, you have to deal with your family, who more often than not will disown you. So that's what happened with me.
Are you
And
in contact with your family, or have they?
no, I haven't been ever. I mean, I hadn't even left Islam yet. I had just taken off my hijab, and that was enough for my mother to threaten me with death. So I haven't had any contact with her in almost 2 decades. And that's a pretty common response. So the way my mother explained it to me, which is, it makes total logical sense, and I've heard this from so many other people that their mothers have told them the same thing, which is, when my mother told me that she needed to kill me for taking off my hijab, she said, I need to make sure that, because if you take off your hijab, your next step is probably going to be to leave the religion. And I need to make sure that you do not become a non-believer, because if you do, that's on me. Now my akhira, my hereafter, is threatened because I raised a non-Muslim daughter.
Oh
So
my
I'll need to make
God.
sure you're killed before that happens, because
That
I don't want to spend eternity in hell for bringing a non-Muslim into this world.
it sounds
So
like
it was kind of,
one of the tweaks that Muhammad made to keep this locked down, or one of the tweaks that was put in place. Wow, that is.
it's her responsibility as my parent to make sure that I follow the religion, which is why there are certain rules in Islam that, like, at 7 years old, if kids are not praying, then they're to be beaten. So you have to make sure that you get them in line at a young age, so that way they don't stray, because that's your responsibility as a parent to make sure that they stay on the right path.
And just to finish up with a slightly happier note, do you have any tips on how we can support other people who are under these indoctrinations and fundamentalist religion?
So the first thing I'm going to suggest is that you look into my organization, Free Hearts, Free Minds. Mm-hmm. And if you go to my website, freeheartsfreeminds.com, and you click on testimonials, then you can read testimonials from people all over the world who have gone through our program. So we have a psychotherapist that uses cognitive behavioral therapy and other methods of supporting people who are in Muslim majority countries, who are living with that trauma of a double life, sometimes, you know, a triple life, because they're gay and ex-Muslim. And so, okay, thank you. Yeah, so this is from Lubna in Nigeria, Malaysia, and as you keep scrolling, you see that there are people from all over the world that we've helped. And after just 6 weeks, they're able to write this testimonial for us. So we are very, very grateful that we're able to literally save lives, because as you can imagine, there's a lot of suicide prevention going on in our organization. And, you know, if you're able to donate, that's wonderful. If you're not, then I encourage you to please support women. For example, the hashtag Free From Hijab. So those are women that are fighting. Those are feminists all over the Muslim world who are fighting for the right to be able to wear whatever they want to wear. So again, that's hashtag Free From Hijab, HIJAB. Or you can even just in your day-to-day life, when you hear somebody make a statement about something that you believe, or that you know, maybe after you've listened to this conversation, you know that what they're saying is actually not true, or it's different from what you believe, I encourage you to just speak up and to get that conversation going, because unfortunately what's happened is Islam ends up getting sort of this exceptional sacred cow status where nobody wants to criticize it, nobody wants to talk about it because they don't want to be considered Islamophobic or racist or bigot. And then of course, if you can never criticize something, then it will never be able to progress. That's how Christianity was able to progress. That's how Judaism was able to progress. And the hope is that's how Islam will progress as well, is through constant criticism from people who are viewing it with a critical eye and are criticizing it for its homophobia and its racism and its sexism and all of those things that it deserves to be criticized for. So please don't bite your tongue, but please feel free, empowered, and be honest, and speak up against the issues that you see in this religion in exactly the same way you would speak up against issues that you see in Christianity. Please, I beg you.
Now, do you feel that, have you heard of street epistemology and the way to have a conversation with people to allow them to examine? Do you feel that street epistemology would be something that would be helpful to have conversations like this with people?
I think it absolutely would be, yeah. I think that the mistake that a lot of people think is that they will, if they have these conversations with their Muslim friends and neighbors and coworkers or something like that, that person will get angry at them or be offended or something like that. But the truth is, the people that act that way are usually the white saviors. Those are the liberal white knights that are coming in and trying to protect the Muslims. They are usually the people who will get offended and angry at you and maybe try to unfriend you or something like that. But in my experience, Muslim people are never really allowed the opportunity to discuss their religion. They're never allowed the opportunity to answer questions about it or to question it themselves. And so if you very carefully and gently discuss these issues with your, with Muslim people in your life, then they will be open to it, probably mostly because they're going to try to convert you. So that's always the aim, is if a non-Muslim asks questions about Islam, you respond to them in kind, because you want to convince them that this is the religion. So they will be open to having that discussion with you. And, I encourage you to try to have that discussion with them, and also to try to have that discussion with your friends and neighbors who think that Islam is the religion of peace and that the hijab is feminist and empowering, and that you can't criticize any aspects of Islam because it's Islamophobia. Please feel empowered to have those discussions, and I'll encourage you to pick up my book, which will give you some more tips about how to have those conversations as well.
Yasmine.
That is, oh, sorry. We're both too excited.
I know. Go ahead.
I just want to say thank you so much for being here and giving this amazing talk. It got really dark, but I think it's very important that we speak about these issues and that we acknowledge that this is a reality and just not ignore it. So thank you so much for speaking about it, because I know it can be an easy conversation to have. And now we are going to jump to the Q&A section, and there are a lot of questions here, so we're not going to be able to go through all of them.
Before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and put the resources that accompany this discussion into the chat, and they'll also be in the YouTube description, as well as how to learn more about Yasmine and her story, because we obviously were not able to cover all of that either. So I'll go ahead and do that. And Amaya, why don't you start off with the questions?
Yes. So the first question is, why do Muslims hate it when Muhammad is drawn?
When he's wrong?
Drawn. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's because of a rule that Muhammad made. So he made a rule that there can never be he didn't want anybody worshiping idols, because he wanted everybody to be Muslim. So he outlawed creating any kind of idols, so any statues. So that includes him. He included himself in that as well. He said, don't make replicas of any animals or humans or gods, including me. And so that's why you'll find these incredibly creepy dolls. If you Google Islamic dolls, they're faceless. They're faceless dolls with just a hijab on. Nightmare fuel. But that's the kind of thing that happens now because Muhammad made that rule.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, thank you. And what future do you see? Is there any way like humanity can address this kind of horrible behavior and maybe make it a bit less horrible? How do you see the future of the religion?
Well, I think that the religion is horrible, and there's no way to make the religion any less horrible. But I do believe in humanity, and I do believe in people, in the goodness of people. And so I truly, honestly believe that if there is a separation of mosque and state, if people are given the option to not follow Sharia and to not follow Islam, that they will take it. People want to be free, especially women in those countries. They want to be free. So if we are able to somehow allow them that freedom, I think that this religion will be a thing of the past very, very quickly. It will be no different than, Greek mythology. It'll be forgotten.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And how do you feel about people calling Islamophobics those who speak against Islam? So I know Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins, amongst many other people, have been called Islamophobic because they have spoken out against Islam. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, so that's very, very dangerous. It's very, very dangerous to make an ideology above criticism and to say that you are not allowed to criticize this ideology or that makes you a bad person. I mean, can you just imagine if they'd had that same rule about Christianity and they said, oh, criticizing Christianity is Christianophobic. I mean, in fact, they did have that rule, but they had it top down. So the church didn't allow people to criticize it, but the people still did. But what's happening here is it's bottom up. The people who are living in a country where their First Amendment is free speech are shutting down the speech of others. In Pakistan and Saudi Arabia and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, we have blasphemy laws where people cannot criticize the religion of Islam or they will be imprisoned if not killed. So that's top down. And then over here in the West, we've created a bottom up, self-imposed blasphemy laws by creating that word Islamophobia. And so what that ends up doing is not allowing any oxygen, no space for criticizing this religion that very, very desperately deserves criticism. And it can neither happen in the Muslim majority countries or in the West either. So it's an incredibly dangerous thing that we've done. And I wholeheartedly disagree with that term, Islamophobia. It was created by Islamists to squash criticism of the religion, and it has worked like a charm, unfortunately. So people need to push back against that. Of course, anti-Muslim bigotry is a real thing and a completely separate issue. And so when somebody is being bigoted towards human beings because of who they are, because of what they believe, that is of course abhorrent. And luckily we have laws against those kinds of things, and we have, hate crimes, et cetera, et cetera. So we have ways of dealing with people who engage in anti-Muslim bigotry. So that is a completely separate thing from Islamophobia, because now it has nothing to do with the person. It's not Muslim, but it's Islam. You're stopping people from criticizing the ideology, which of course is incredibly dangerous, as we know from any fascist society.
It seems like there is this, I don't know if it's a fine line, but it's a tightrope walk between respecting a culture, respecting someone's right to believe what they want to believe, but also identifying and talking about the dangers that it can have on other people. where do we kind of draw that line? How do we make that distinction between respecting a culture, but making it clear that some of these practices are not acceptable?
Well, first of all, I think it's really important to understand the difference between religion and culture. So quite often those two things are conflated, and people think that women wear hijab because it's their culture, and they are not realizing that it's actually their religion that demands it. So when we're speaking out against, we're not saying, we're not speaking out against cultural clothing. I don't have a problem with a German person wearing lederhosen. Do you know what I mean? Like this is hijab is not cultural clothing. It's like Amaya said, it's purity culture being enforced on women. And so when we speak out against it, we're not speaking out against our culture, because again, Muslim women from Somalia, Indonesia, Egypt, Russia, America, Bosnia, hundreds of countries around the world all wear hijab, and they don't share a culture. They have nothing in common culturally, but it is their religion that we are criticizing. We are criticizing the modesty culture aspects of that religion that encourages victim blaming and slut shaming and other aspects of rape culture. That's what we're speaking out against as feminists.
That's
that
fantastic.
makes sense.
Great distinction. Thank you. And I also liked your top-down versus bottom-up type of distinction as well. We have kind of like a couple of Islam-specific questions, like the physical book of Quran. It wasn't written down until about 200 years after the death of Muhammad. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Well, that was the hadith that wasn't compiled until that long after his death. Yeah. So the Quran supposedly, again, the historical evidence does not jive with what we were taught as Muslims, but supposedly there was only ever one Quran, but history has shown that we have artifacts of many different Qurans that were out there. And, there was a leadership decision made to burn all the other editions, I guess, of the Quran, and to have one, and then to force kids to memorize it so that it continues in a sort of with that verbal tradition. And so that way, even if all of the copies of the Quran are burned, Muslim people will always have it in their minds and in their hearts. So yeah, it was supposedly written down in his day, and that was the one copy, but we know for a fact that that's not true. Even hadith, there's a hadith where Aisha, his 6-year-old wife, talks about how a goat ate some of the pages of the Quran. So we know that there's no way that it was kept intact. And yeah,
that almost sounds
like to pretend.
That almost sounds very similar to Joseph Smith kind of making excuses for how some of his pages have disappeared or couldn't translate some.
Yeah. I mean, when you're not looking at it, like, so when you're allowed to look at it critically, it is absolutely ridiculous. But because when you're born and raised, it's a cult, right? It's an indoctrination. So you're not allowed to think outside the box, which is my the logo for my organization, the box being the Kaaba. But you're not allowed to question these things. You're not allowed to think about these things. So there's a hadith that says, for example, how do we know we should stone women who are adulterers? Why do we do that? Oh, well, we know to do that because some scholar once saw a lady monkey cheating on her husband monkey, and then the other monkeys started pelting her with rocks. And so we learned from that that's what we should do. If a woman cheats on her husband, that we should also, I mean,
wow.
Or all of the hadith about drinking camel urine and how it's medicinal, it will cure all diseases. I mean, when you are born and raised and indoctrinated in that, you never really, it's surprising to say this, but you never really think of how ridiculous it is. I guess it's like a Christian learning about a talking snake or something. You never
Yeah.
really think about it. It just is what it is. And then once you leave the religion, you start to think, oh my gosh, how could I have possibly ever believed that nonsense?
Well, believing in or a set of beliefs being passed down generation to generation. As a child, this is how you're introduced to the world. You don't have a manual on what the world is going to be like and what is true, what it isn't. We just have to teach it to one another. And so, yeah, we we of course, as a kid, we're going to believe these things, but it is ridiculous many times when we come out of it.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, we only have time for one last question, unfortunately. So we often hear that Islam is more conservative or more radical now than what it used to be 20 to 30 years ago. And some people believe that this is because of Western intervention in the Middle East. What are your thoughts on whether if this is true, and also what is the reason why this has been radicalized or not radicalized?
Yeah. So after the Ottoman Empire fell, so Islam had spread into Spain and into Europe for hundreds of years, and once it fell, Muslims got together in Egypt and they wanted to figure out how can we build our empire again. And this is in like the 1920s. And they realized, well, we can't get it back the same way we got it the first time through the sword, forcing people to convert or die. We can't do that again. So this time we will use more diplomatic means. And so they came up with a 3-point process. 1 would be through immigration. 2 would be through the wombs of Muslim mothers. So that's through having many, many children. So one man marries 4 women. Each one of those women has as many kids as she possibly can, creating more Muslims, therefore raising the population of Muslims in these societies, and therefore they can have more voting power. And 3rd, through using secular laws against themselves, against itself, basically. And they have been using those 3 methods very successfully all this time. And in order to answer your question about the anti-Western sentiments, absolutely, that had a lot to do with it. That's kind of like the marriage that we see right now between communists and Islamists, is because they both hate the West. And so you'll see that marriage happening in Iran and Iraq. You saw it in Egypt and Syria. It's a very common alliance. And yeah, so it's very anti-Western, anti-American. But you have to remember, America is just like a couple hundred years old. So the reason why America is hated is essentially this is because it's non-Muslim. They hate all non-Muslim people and societies and cultures, because the aim, I don't know if I should say the word hate, but they fight against all non-Muslim people, societies, and cultures, because the aim is to spread Islam across the globe, because only when everybody is following Islam will there be peace. And so that's why that is the aim. So the aim is for peace, for all of us to conform, and then there will be no more fighting.
Yasmine, thank you so much for joining us. Well, that's kind of reached the end of the questions. We have a hangout after we have a little bit of a word from our executive director. Do you have some time to spend with us for a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I saw a bunch of questions popping up there, so I know there's a lot more questions to come. So yes, I'd be happy to stay on and answer some more.
So before we go, do you have any final words you'd like to say, or anything we didn't really cover you want to talk about?
No, again, I just wanted to thank you both for planning this, for organizing this, and thank everybody for coming here today and engaging in this discussion. I'm just really grateful that people are interested, and I hope that they will take some of the messages that we heard here today and spread them far and wide, and just, I hope I planted some seeds.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel much more educated, and I have much more compassion towards the folks who are struggling to get out of this, and even towards some of the folks who are trapped in it. So
Mhm.
I, I am a better person because of it, because of this discussion. Thank you for being so just eloquent and prepared and just fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. That's very sweet. My pleasure.
I'm sorry, Amaya, would you like to say anything else?
Yes, of course. I was just going to say that I agree with everything Eric has said. I loved having you here. I feel like we don't speak enough about Islam, so I feel like this was a very, very needed conversation to have, and we couldn't possibly have had anyone better to do it. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for being here, because it's amazing. It's really an honor to have you here.
Thank you both.
And now let's talk about next week. So next week, we are going to talk about a topic that is so common in ex-religious people, and it's just so important, and it's the guilt and shame. So they're going to talk about feeling regrets or guilt over things that you did when you were religious. So if you converted people, or if you offended people by being anti-LGBTQ+, or all sorts of different behaviors that you may feel regrets about. And they're also going to talk about how to get over, I guess, how to stop feeling guilty about things that right now they're fine, but because religion taught you that they were wrong, you feel shame now. For example, sex, and other different topics. So I feel like it's going to be amazing. It's going to be done by Rebecca Williams and Priya Westerband Otero, who obviously have been in RfRx before, and they're amazing. So it's going to be really, really good one. And just as a reminder, if you want to see any of our previous RfRx sessions, you can find them in our YouTube channel. If you have any questions, you can send it to our email address, rfrx@recoveringfromreligion.org. And we also have a blog and a podcast, which you can check it out if you want to. And I think now, Eric, you're going to share the poll, the lever poll.
Yes, and so we guys, we want to, and gals and folks out there, we want to hear from you. Your feedback kind of helps us guide these discussions. And so I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll. Like I said at the beginning, it's going to be anonymous, and so we won't be able to see how you answer it, but we'd really appreciate your feedback. All right, and now we're going to hear from our fantastic, beautiful, wonderful, intelligent, and traveling executive director, Gail Jordan. Gail, how are you doing today?
I'm fine, Eric. It's good to see you, and I am no longer traveling. I am home. I am home atop my little Oregon mountaintop, new Oregon home. So I am no longer traveling. Thank you for that introduction. I always feel like I can't live up to it. Yasmine, let me thank you again for such an incredibly powerful presentation. From the moment you described your sweet 5-year-old self protecting your mom's Dolly Parton's records to the end of your presentation, I was absolutely enchanted by you and by your story and by your spirit and by your perseverance and by your fight and by your activism. I am so grateful that you have shared that with us here at Recovering from Religion. It's everything about what we do. We sometimes lose sight and become so ethnocentric with our own American religion that we lose sight of the impact of what religion can do, the serious, severe damage that religion can do. And thank you for sharing that with us at a personal cost as well. I'm sure it's not easy for you to relate those stories and your own personal experience, and I am deeply grateful to you. At this point in our program, if you have attended before, those of you who are here this evening, you know that we have what we call our RFR moment, where we talk a little bit about our programs and our blog and our podcast, and the fact that we're always looking for volunteers and we depend upon donations of like-minded individuals. And normally that would be what we do right now. We're going to change things up a little bit tonight. Amaya used the word that the session tonight was a little dark. It was a little tough, and it's going to continue to be that way. this last week, we lost one of our, we lost one of our RFR volunteers who held a special place in the hearts of many of us. He was a volunteer, he was an agent on the helpline, but in addition to that, he was the point leader for an upgrade that we're doing with all of RFR's technology, unexpectedly. And so we're going to use this moment instead of an RFR commercial and our RFR moment to spend a few moments reflecting on the life of Chris Boothman. And I want to introduce you to a very special friend of his who is also an RFR volunteer and the project manager of RFR 3.0, Gwen Blodgett. Gwen, I think you're in the room and I think you're unmuted. So I'm going to step back. Thank you again, Yasmine, for an incredible session. And Gwen, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Gail. Yes, and I know Chris would have really appreciated hearing the story tonight. He had such a passion and a love for helping those who had been hurt by religion. In his own words, he grew up Church of England with a very casual sort of faith, and he joined RFR because he thought it might be a chance to debate Christians. And after he found out what the mission was, his heart just, grew 10 times larger than it was to begin with, and just cared about helping those who were hurt by religion. And we have a huge team of volunteers, and yet our technology, we know we could do more, and he had a vision for that. And I had the pleasure of getting to know him on the 3.0 project. And, he loved his mom, his daughters. We never met in person, but we spent hours and hours together via Skype, Zoom. Well, Zoom, work is Skype. I get it mixed up sometimes. But it's been really hard. He had such passion for the work that RFR does, and such a big heart, and just an amazing dry wit. Just always there to lend a hand. And as a group, the volunteers who've been working on the 3.0 project to improve our back-end infrastructure and our technology have committed to dedicating this project to him so that we can help more and more. And one of the big topics we're talking about right now is how to protect the safety of those who are messaging us from Muslim countries, because we take it seriously that there are countries where doubting your faith has a penalty of death. And so, Yasmine, it's just so amazing to have heard your story and to be reminded again of why what we're doing is so important. And then lastly, I just want to say Chris lived a deep life. And, the quote that, and I always forget the author of it, Ralph Waldo Emerson, he said, "It's not the length of life, but the depth of life." And Chris had an incredibly deep life. And he would, if he could come back and haunt me, he would come back and haunt me if I didn't mention his love for the Liverpool Football Club and their absolutely song, "You'll Never Walk Alone." And I've been able to be in touch with his mom, and the song "You'll Never Walk Alone" will be played at his funeral. He'll be wearing his Liverpool jersey, for those of you who knew him. And the other song that's going to be played is "I See Your Love Everywhere." Chapman, I'm forgetting her name, but it basically is that, speaks to the message that when you get to know someone, you see their smile, you see their passion everywhere. And Chris Boothman is going to be part of RFR for years and years to come. So thank you, Gail, for a chance to say a little bit about him. And for those of you who know him, you know that he had a large, large heart.
Thank you, Gwen. Yeah, a lot of us are going to miss him, and I think you more than most. Thank you. Dr. Ray, you had wanted to say something real quick too, is that correct?
Yeah, I just wanted to let people know the reason we chose to do this tonight is because most of you don't know Chris, but we want you to understand, or at least have a little flavor of how dedicated he was. And he's just one of many volunteers that are doing great work for RFR. And it's just an honor. The board and Gail and I are all honored that we got to know got to know Chris, and we just wanted everybody to help us a little bit celebrate his life, and by extension, the lives of all the volunteers that are working with RFR that Chris touched. Thanks. That's all I have.
Well, everyone, thank you so much. This is going to wrap up RfRx, and we will see you next week.
Reach out today at recoveringfromreligion.org.